Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute. It's really good to be back with you. Had a couple of days of, what started off as not all that bad food poisoning and just didn't get better. And this morning I'm still weak as a kitten. Just feel like the proverbial truck ran over me. But I wanted to go ahead and produce a video this morning. Now, I had promised you that I would begin tomorrow with a review and refutation of Sam Frost's book, The Parousia of the Son of Man. I hope you'll forgive me, but the way that I feel, I'm doing good to do this morning. And so I will begin a week from tomorrow with our review and refutation of Sam Frost's book. As I promised, I want to begin an examination of a doctrine that is known as the birth pangs of Messiah. In Matthew chapter 24, Jesus said, in response to the disciples' questions about the end of the age, he said, you will hear, first of all, he said, do not be deceived. You will hear of wars, rumors of wars, earthquakes, famines, pestilence, etc., etc. Nation shall rise against nation. But he said, these are the beginning of the birth pangs. Now remember, but he said, the end is not yet. Now in Luke's version, it says, the end is not immediately. Okay, and it's important to notice that distinction. But when Jesus said, these are the beginning of birth pangs. Now, there's a couple of things here. First of all, if you'll remember, in my previous video, I responded to some things that Mr. Sam Frost had said. Mr. Sam Frost initially said that there's no end to the age. Well, when I pointed out that the disciples most assuredly were thinking about the end of the age when Jesus predicted the fall of Jerusalem, he came back and said, well, yes, of course they were thinking that the fall of Jerusalem would be, oh my goodness, that's the end of the age. They correctly thought that. So on the one hand, Mr. Frost said there's no end to the age. On the other hand, he said, yes, the disciples correctly thought of the end of the age when Jesus predicted the destruction of the temple. That's a major self-contradiction. Then Mr. Frost tried to convince us that the wars and rumors of wars is actually referring to AD 70. So in Mr. Frost's new paradigm, verses 6 and 7 refers to AD 70, and that has Jesus saying, well, the end is not yet, refers to AD 70. And that the end of the age is beyond the fall of the temple, which the disciples correctly linked with the end of the age. You see the problem here? I mean, this is theology that's all over the map and has no harmony, no unity, and it violates the text. But here's what I want to get to. Jesus said those wars, rumors of wars, earthquakes, famines, pestilence, etc., are the beginning of the birth pangs. Now, here's what you need to know. This is such a fantastic, rewarding study. The whole concept of what is known as the birth pangs of Messiah, messianic birth pains, similar terminology, is a purely Jewish concept. In the Jewish eschatological narrative, in the timeline, the Jews believed that in the final generation, in the final generation, there would be a time of great distress and persecution of the elect, persecution of the righteous remnant. Keep that in mind, Critical. Well, this time of great distress, this time of the messianic birth pains, by the way, in conjunction with the appearance of Elijah, the great prophet, who would come before the great and the terrible day of the Lord, Malachi chapter 4, verse 5 and 6. So you have the appearance of Elijah, you have the messianic birth pangs. And the messianic birth pains would actually lead directly to, some associate it as the same as, the Great Tribulation, which would lead directly, immediately to the coming of the Lord, the judgment, the resurrection. And by the way, I hope my audio is better this morning. I've done my best to make some adjustments. But anyway, hope it works. Okay, so the messianic birth pangs give rise to the coming of the Lord, judgment, and resurrection. Now watch this. In Romans chapter 8, Paul says, we know that the whole creation labors in birth pangs. Some translations simply say travail or suffering or something like that. But it misses the point. In Matthew chapter 24 and verse 8, Jesus said these, the things that he had just spoken of, were, I'll try that, Bible studies. We'll see if that helps a little bit. These are the beginnings of the odonoi, the birth pangs, plural. Okay? Now, in Romans chapter 8, we know that the whole creation groans together in birth pains. And it's pseudodonai, but the whole point of it is, same basic Greek word, and Paul was saying, writing to the Romans, they were living in the time of the birth pangs. Folks, do you catch the power of that? Paul was essentially echoing Jesus' prediction in Matthew chapter 8. And he said they were living in those very times. The birth pangs were present. And by the way, notice in Matthew chapter 24, 9 and following, 10 and following, and the parallel of Mark chapter 13, 8 and following, they shall deliver you up to be persecuted. They will bring you before kings and before governors and before the authorities and before Sanhedrins. Needless to say, that's Jewish persecution. So guess what, folks? Jewish persecution of the saints was part of the birth pangs of Messiah. The power of this is absolutely incredible. By the way, Bible studies, did that help the sound at all? Hopefully it did. So, again, you got to catch the power of this. Jesus associated persecution of the saints with the birth pangs. Mark chapter 13, he associates that with Jewish persecution of his followers. That means that the birth pangs, messianic birth pangs, had to do with Jewish persecution of the saints. Now, if you're going to put the birth pangs of Messiah, which lead directly to the parousia, the judgment and the resurrection, if you're going to put it off in our future, then of necessity you are thereby positing Jewish persecution of the saints, the followers of Jesus, in our future. Well, sorry, Bible studies, we tried. Yeah, we tried. I don't know what else to try. I've done everything that I know. Okay. But again, you have to catch the power of that. Not only did Jesus tie persecution of his followers with the birth pangs, but notice in Romans chapter 8 and verse 16, Paul told those Roman brethren who were being persecuted by the Jews to rejoice insomuch that they were participants in the sufferings of Christ. And then he said, the whole creation groans in labor pains until now. Well, once again, folks, that means they were in the midst of the birth pains. But the birth pains would give birth to the kingdom, resurrection, judgment. Now, here's what's absolutely fascinating about this. This entire concept has an Old Testament prophetic source. In Isaiah chapter 66, the Lord pondered a hypothetical question. Shall I, Yahweh, bring to the time of birth and not bring forth? Well, that hypothetical question demanded, well, no, Lord, when the time of birth arrives, you are going to bring forth. What was he going to bring forth? The new creation, resurrection, judgment. And in Isaiah chapter 66, guess what? The Lord said that at that time of the birth, Isaiah 64, 9 and following, I will bring on them that which they fear. Oh, what was it that they feared? Among other things, he said, a voice in the city, a cry in the temple. And the Lord said he was going to destroy Jerusalem. That's at the time of the birth. And when the Lord said, will I bring to the time of birth and not bring forth? No, I will not do that. So when we come to Matthew chapter 24, and Jesus talks about these times of distress, times of persecution, as the beginning of the birth pangs, and that includes, once again, the time of persecution, and Paul picks up on that, writing later in that identical generation, and he says, the whole creation groans in labor pains together until now, and part of those labor pains was persecution. What were they waiting for? Redemption of creation, the new creation of Isaiah chapter 66. But that new creation of Isaiah 66 would come when? When Jerusalem was destroyed and the new Jerusalem arrived. Wow, this is incredible. Now look, we barely touched the hem of the garment. This is video number 1 in regard to the birth pangs of Messiah. Now look, our special for this month of April 2019 is my book, We Shall Meet Him in the Air, The Wedding of the King of Kings. In this book, I have an extensive, in-depth discussion and investigation of the Messianic birth pangs. It's one of the most extensive discussions of the birth pangs of Messiah that I believe that you will find that is readily accessible. Now look, the scholarly world has recognized the significance of the subject literally for centuries. This book regularly sells for $23.95 plus $4.95 shipping. But for April 2019, total delivered price $19.95. That will save you almost $10. Go to my website. There's a banner right up at the right up at the very top for the April 2019 special. We shall meet him in the air. Do yourself a favor. Get the book. $19.95. You will be glad that you did. And believe you me, folks, when you see this study of the Messianic birth pains, it will blow you away, because it absolutely demands that the coming of the Lord, the judgment, the resurrection was in the first century at the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70. Hey, listen, thanks so much for joining me for this morning's Morning Musings. You be safe. I appreciate all of your prayers, all of your comments about hoping that I get it better. I'm better. Thank you. Lord willing, we'll see you on Monday.